First, President Obama rammed through his signature health care law. Next, he strong-armed the Supreme Court, which he stacked with liberals to call Obamacare attacks. And then the president, 28 times, personally changed or delayed the law to suit his needs and presumably his political pals. 28 times without consulting Congress. Some of us on the right are downright tired of the president acting more like King Obama than the elected official that he is. Here's Krauthammer.
Remember how Democrats were complaining that when Republicans were trying to overturn Obamacare, it was somehow unpatriotic because it was an attack on the law of the land. This law of the land doesn't even exist. It exists in Obama's head. It's whatever he thinks. He wakes up in the morning and decides what the law is going to be.
Well, President Obama's use of the executive order, executive privilege, whatever, is getting so egregious, even liberal professors are pushing back.
I think that many people will look back at this period in history and see nothing but confusion as to why people remained so silent when the president asserted these types of unilateral actions. You have a president who's claiming the right to basically rewrite or ignore or negate federal laws. Now, that's a very dangerous thing.
So, Bob, your guy thinks he can do whatever the heck he wants.
Well, first of all, let me give you just a few facts here. He did not stack the Supreme Court with liberals. It's a conservative court, and it has been for the last 15 years.
Yeah,
Secondly, he did not ram his bill through Congress.
Sure he
got enough votes to win in Congress, so that's not ramming it through. So the idea that somehow you're saying it stacks the Supreme Court, that may be the most laughable thing I've heard. Look, he is right on the edge here. I think Turley's right.
Did he appoint two, and both were very liberal?
Yeah, but it's still a 5-4 court.
Well, I understand what it is. Well,
okay, it's not a stacked court.
Maybe it's 5-4, but go ahead.
I think Turley's right. I think he's right on the edge here in a lot of these things, and I think the way to answer it is to go to court. I mean, if Turley says people are going to look back on this period in history, why not look right now and say, okay, let's take it to court and see what happens. Let the Supreme Court decide.
Greg, Turley's a constitutional professor and lawyer. Thinks it's dangerous.
Yeah. The problem is, it's interesting. The Obamacare defense mirrors that of war. No matter how bad it gets, you have to stick with it. You can't bail out. Instead of patriotism, it's Obamaism. Because if you decide that you dissent, then people look at you in the same way that they would look at somebody who is not being patriotic. And you have the media that is there alongside, cheering it along. It's like that corrupt cop in a movie where a victim always goes to the corrupt cop, says, I've been mugged, and the cop just laughs. That's the media. If you complain about these things, the media just laughs and goes, so what? They're the mocking, corrupt bag of slime that laughs whenever you point out the lies.
Well, that still doesn't mean they can't go to court. I mean,
I wasn't answering that question.
You know what, Bob? You're right. Yes, you're 100% right. It became law. It went from bill to law, and he won. But the problem is, Dana, as we pointed out yesterday, 28 different times President Obama has he's decided he wants to change a law. He can't do that.
So the Supreme Court gave the president the go-ahead to implement the law, but it's the implementation of the law that has showed that government doesn't do a good a job as they think they would like to. Jonathan Turley, a serious professor, used to really complain about the concerns about too much power in the executive during the Bush administration. I think it's refreshing to see it now, too, because he's not so much interested in defending the president himself. He's talking about the presidency as a whole, as an office. What he's saying is that in the future, it will be much more difficult for any president to resist doing this type of unilateral action without working with Congress if somebody doesn't raise red flags right now. The concern that Turley is explaining is not just about one particular policy with President Obama. It's a concern about the strength of the presidency going forward.
And Charles Krauthammer sat right there. He said President Obama wakes up and decides what he wants to do, and then he doesn't. He doesn't consult Congress. If we don't consult Congress, what do we need him for? What do we need a Congress and Senate? And why do we elect these people?
A bit odd coming from a constitutional professor, a former professor, but he is lawless. There's no question about it. He's shown he has no regard for the First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, separation of powers, checks and balances. He unilaterally decides what he's going to do with Obamacare, sometimes immigration, and when it comes to executing Americans abroad. The reason he's so bold is because of the media. They never checked him. They never were the check and balance that they were supposed to be. And my fear, I know, Bob, you say that go to court.
It's an idea.
My fear is that if he does get sued, let's say, and the court comes down against the president, Will the president ignore a court order?
No.
What happens then? And I do think we are seeing the beginning of a constitutional crisis. If not, we're in the midst of a full-fledged constitutional crisis. And I do agree that it is the precedent that is the most important thing. What if someone even far more radical than President Obama comes in and the precedent's been set that checks and balances mean nothing and they can do whatever we want? That is
do you think that the President of the United States is going to ignore the Supreme Court? That would be a constitutional crisis. That would lead to impeachment.
I would not
it's not
put
going to
anything
happen.
past
Oh,
President
come
Obama.
on. You guys are making this guy into a bigger ogre than he... I mean, it's just ridiculous. This guy's got you guys consumed.
I don't know, Bob. No one knows.
Obama's consuming your mind.
All right, let's move on. Remember when the president claimed he had absolutely no idea that his Healthcare.gov website wasn't ready to go live October 1st? If you don't remember, here's a refresher.
On the website, I was not informed directly that the website would not be working as the way it was supposed to. Had I been informed, I wouldn't be going out saying, boy, this is going to be great.
Wow. Interesting, because according to The Hill, we found out today they obtained documents, FOIA-requested documents, 18 separate times. He either met with Kathleen Sebelius or spoke to her on the phone. How in the world did he not know?
Well, I have a feeling it's possibly because she didn't know the extent of how bad the website was going to be, or that she didn't tell him. I don't think that I'm going to say that I don't think the president is lying. Some people are trying to suggest that he lied about that he didn't know the extent of it. I can imagine being in the Oval Office and saying, yes, sir, we have some challenges, but we are working on them, and we should be ready to go by October 1st. The fact that they weren't completely honest either with her and then ultimately with the president is a concern for which no one has actually been held accountable.
You know, Ange, we've talked about this before. A couple of the other things that the president claimed he didn't know about. They put this ring around him, this plausible deniability ring around him. Well, yeah, we talked to your people, your advisors, but we never physically spoke to the president. She's got 18 different occurrences of meeting with the president, seeing or speaking to him. Do you believe there's any way he didn't know that site wasn't ready? And if that's true, should she be fired?
She definitely should be fired, but that would be a reward. I actually think she wants to be fired. But there's this growing sense, and if you read staffers in the White House on background, you get the sense that they don't like to deliver bad news to President Obama. He doesn't like bad news. And Dana makes a really good point. I can't imagine going into my former boss, a governor or a senator, and saying this thing is a total disaster, because then they're going to look and go, well, fix it, Andrea. It's on your head. So I do think they did probably keep a lot of it from him to cover their own behinds. However, I cannot believe that Kathleen Sebelius had no idea. I am not buying that for 1 second.
Can I just go back to Dana 1 second? We'll get you guys in. But there was a piece about 3 months ago where there were two reporters, I believe it was the Washington Post, I can't remember their names, but they said that the advisors, President Obama's advisors, were made aware that that site was nowhere near ready. Why didn't the advisors tell them?
Well, and then that was a question of what is the information flow like to the president, and is it so broken that they don't tell him, or were they not told themselves, or did they just think that the media was going to give them a pass on it? Remember when President Obama went to the White House Correspondents' Dinner the first year, and he said something like, everything was going to be smooth sailing, and he makes a joke and he says, because you all voted for me? There's actually not so much of a joke, because everybody laughed because they knew that it was true. And I think that the softness that the media has treated them with leading up to the website failures led to probably less than satisfying answers given to the president.
Greg, someone failed. Either President Obama failed, Kathleen Sebelius failed, the advisors. Where does the buck stop?
Well, I don't know if it's President Obama's fault, because let's face it, with Sebelius, she's not the sharpest quill on the porcupine. I have a feeling that she went to the White House 18 times, but she didn't know that it was the White House. She thought it was an Ethan Allen furniture outlet. and she never actually ran into President Obama. Look, this is the way I see this. The administration and the media, which is its enabler, has absolutely no patience for the majority of Americans. So in that case, every act and law is a certain kind of retribution for past sins. So in a sense, we are at the mercy of vengeful cultists who are determined to gut their mother and father for not being nice to them when they're kids.
You know, you've got to be in a White House and work in a White House. I think two of us here have in any event. I very rarely, if ever, remember a cabinet secretary telling the president bad news. I mean, it's I very rarely.
Oh, I forget. You work for Carter and everything.
Yeah, very rarely. You tell me how many people stood up to Bush.
Stood up? Absolutely. What do you think it was like to have to tell them that the banks were failing? You think Hank Paulson and Ben Bernanke didn't have to
Well, that
call
was
them up
sort of tough to tell them, since they were failing around them every day.
Do you think that why do you think General Petraeus comes back and has to tell the president the war is failing, we have to do something to change it? So what did the president do? Fixed it. Of course, I told him bad news every day.
By and large, cabinet secretaries do not. But leave that aside. You have no evidence this abuse in these meetings. First of all, a lot of these meetings were.
Somebody had to know, Bob.
Somebody had to know, right? I'm sure somebody knew. But I'm not trying to excuse her. But first of all, these meetings you're talking about, a lot of these were meetings with healthcare groups. They were meeting when she was there.
And the IRS.
This is his signature legislation kicking off the day it was supposed to kick off. It wasn't ready. Do you think that if the boss had something going, a brand new show ready to go, and you knew something was going to go wrong with the show, wouldn't you tell the boss before?
No, would you?
Yeah, I would.
Yeah, sure you would.
That's just me. All right, we want to get to your health care numbers. Can we do it in a second?
I don't. They're so good that I don't want to bring a pall over your guys' anti-Obamaism.
All right, we'll do it after this next shot. So how will all the politics the president is playing with our lives play out in the midterm elections later this year? I have an idea, but let's listen from Rush.
I fully expect the 2014 midterms to be a wave election like 2010. I think the people of this country are going to sweep Democrats out of office every chance they get, every opportunity they get.
All right, go ahead, Bob.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Is there anybody besides that we have videotape of besides Rush Limbaugh and Charles Krauthammer?
He's got, Bob, he's got,
do we ever have anybody
he's got
else?
17 million people who listen to him daily. He's influential.
Why
do we not know what his opinion is?
No, they're right-wingers. Of course his opinion is going to be. Do you think it's going to be a wave election? He doesn't know anything about elections, number one. Number two, a wave election would mean that you're going to knock out somewhere between 15 and 20% of the Democrats in the House and about 10% of the Senate. I don't think that's going to happen. It should be 20% of the Senate.
I somewhat agree with Bob. I don't think it's going to be a wave, as Rush is talking about. If he's trying to motivate Republicans to get out and vote, it's a great strategy to do so. I joke that Republicans never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. So fingers crossed on this one. Do I think it's going to be a wave? Maybe not. I think Obamacare is going to be an important issue, but on a lot of this stuff, I feel like people aren't paying attention or they don't care. And if the media is not reporting it, then they don't care. And one last point on the last block. Maybe people didn't tell President Obama how bad the website was because the IRS scandal had just happened. So this was on the heels of that. No one got fired. So why stick your neck out if you're going to keep your job anyway? You might as well just not say anything. Who cares?
Quick thoughts on this one, guys.
Rush could be right as long as the Republicans do not fall into traps and say stupid things. Find normal candidates, no warlocks, mad doctors, two-headed giraffes, and run on what makes America work. Because people sense a decline. They're hungering for renewal. You got to show them how the current administration has undermined all the principles that has made America great. It's a very simple, straightforward thing. That's all you got to do, and you'll probably win. It's morning again, basically.
Hey, Dana, so maybe it's not a technical definition of Bob's definition of a wave, but wouldn't a win in the Senate, taking the Senate back and keeping the House be a wave?
In my opinion, we don't need a wave election. We just Republicans really should try to be winning back the Senate. And I think mechanically they're better poised to do that in 2014 than they were in the last several elections, partly because they have put full-time workers on the ground in all of those key swing states. And just the way that the calendar falls and the way the states are this year, the Republicans are in very good position. But it's not. It won't be easy, so it's going to be really fun to tune into the 5 every day to watch Bob's head explode.
Right, as the polling comes in. Directly ahead.